In March 1973, an undercover narcotics officer met a bartender named Roy Mandujano at a tavern in San Antonio. Mandujano agreed to procure an ounce of heroin, took $650 from the agent, and left. An hour later, he returned empty-handed and refunded the money. At the time, a federal drug enforcement task force was systematically mapping the local narcotics trade. The undercover agent filed a report on the abortive transaction, and the investigative file on Mandujano was closed. But the inquiry did not end on the street. 6 weeks later, Mandujano was subpoenaed to testify before a special grand jury investigating illicit drug traffic in the region. Before questioning began, the prosecutor informed Mandujano he could refuse to answer questions that might incriminate him. He was explicitly warned that if he lied, he could be charged with perjury. However, he was not given the standard Miranda warnings. He was told he could consult a lawyer outside the room, but not inside. This created a distinct procedural friction. The government is formally interrogating a known suspect under oath about a crime they had probable cause to believe he committed, while deliberately omitting the strict custodial safeguards mandated by Miranda v. Arizona. Confronted by the grand jury, Mandujano flatly denied any involvement in the heroin trade. He swore under oath that he had not discussed selling heroin with anyone in the past year. Because the prosecutor already possessed the undercover agent's report, the trap snapped shut. Mandujano was indicted for making false material declarations to a grand jury. The District Court and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals both intervened, suppressing the perjury charge. They reasoned that because Mandujano was a putative defendant, a specific target the government already intended to indict, elemental fairness required full Miranda warnings to prevent prosecutorial entrapment. When the case reached the Supreme Court, the justices identified a categorical error in the lower court's logic. The Fifth Circuit had treated a judicially supervised grand jury inquiry as the equivalent of a police station interrogation. The Supreme Court reversed the decision. They ruled that the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination is a shield against being compelled to confess to a crime. It does not confer a license to commit perjury. The unique structure of the grand jury renders the specific protections of Miranda entirely inapplicable. The Miranda decision was engineered to address a highly specific environment, the isolated, often hostile setting of police custody. It was a judicial countermeasure against the third degree, protracted incommunicado questioning designed to extort confessions through psychological or physical pressure. A grand jury operates under completely different architectural and procedural realities. Unlike the informal, adversarial compulsion of a police station, grand jury testimony is a formal mandate. A witness is not held incommunicado, but questioned before citizens, under oath, guided by a judge. This structure exists to enforce a bedrock axiom of common law dating back to the 18th century. The public has a right to every man's evidence. To extend Miranda to a grand jury proceeding ignores this distinction. Treating a citizen in a judicially supervised setting the same as an arrestee in a holding cell completely misreads the Fifth Amendment. This creates a direct constitutional tension. The state possesses broad authority to compel testimony, but the citizen retains an absolute Fifth Amendment right to refuse to be a witness against themselves. We map this matrix as a decision tree, starting when a prosecutor asks an incriminating question. The witness has two options: answer truthfully, exposing themselves to prosecution, or invoke the Fifth Amendment. If invoked, the prosecution can drop the inquiry or petition a judge for immunity. Immunity acts as the state's ultimate tool, a legal quid pro quo. By guaranteeing that testimony cannot be used against the witness in a future criminal case, the state displaces the danger of self-incrimination. Once immunity is granted, the privilege dissolves, and the witness can be held in contempt if they continue to refuse. Roy Mandujano attempted to forge a third path. He chose to lie. This path leads exclusively to perjury. The Fifth Amendment does not operate automatically to shield false statements. It is a conditional exception to the absolute duty to testify, and if a witness desires its protection, they must actively claim it. Mandujano's defense rested on the premise that he was not adequately warned of his rights before he made the decision to lie. Chief Justice Warren Burger, writing for the plurality, dismantled this argument by examining the inherent function of swearing an oath. When a citizen is subpoenaed, placed before a grand jury, and sworn to tell the truth, that oath carries absolute legal weight. It is not a procedural formality. The oath itself serves as the definitive warning. Requiring a prosecutor to separately admonish a sworn witness not to commit perjury is entirely redundant. It renders the solemnity of the oath meaningless to suggest that a witness needs an additional reminder to adhere to it. Berger relied on established precedent in Bryson v. United States. The legal system provides robust methods for challenging the government's right to ask intrusive questions. Lying is not one of them. The Constitution does not forbid prosecutors from asking criminative questions. The grand jury's purpose is to probe the shadowy precincts of criminal conduct, and often the only people with useful information are those already implicated. The Fifth Amendment only forbids the state from compelling a self-incriminating answer. The moment a witness bypasses the option to remain silent and instead actively provides a false answer, they forfeit the protection of the privilege entirely. While the court unanimously agreed that Mandujano's perjury conviction should stand, the reasoning exposed a deep philosophical fracture among the justices regarding prosecutorial power. The friction centered on the concept of the de facto or putative defendant. This is an individual the prosecution already possesses probable cause to indict, yet instead of charging them, the prosecutor subpoenas them to the grand jury. Justice William Brennan authored a sharp concurrence, warning against the vast potential for abuse. He argued that calling an unindicted suspect to testify about the very crime they are suspected of committing borders on inquisitorial overreach. Brennan viewed this tactic as a blatant subversion of the fundamental adversarial principle. By compelling a target to speak, the state attempts to prove its charge out of the suspect's own mouth, evading the burden of independent investigation. To prevent this, Brennan proposed a strict procedural safeguard. The government must secure an intentional, intelligent waiver of the individual's known rights, including access to counsel. Yet even with these profound structural concerns about state overreach, Brennan did not vote to suppress the evidence in this specific case. The boundary line remained absolute. A witness might be targeted unfairly, and the prosecutor's tactics might be ethically questionable, but perceived duress does not legally justify the commission of perjury under oath. The lower courts in Mandujano's case attempted to forge a new legal protection based purely on the witness's status as a target of the investigation. The Supreme Court's ruling dismantled that approach. A person's status as a putative defendant does not alter or lessen their fundamental civic obligation to provide evidence when lawfully summoned by a grand jury. Outside the highly specific, inherently coercive confines of police custody, the Fifth Amendment is not a self-executing mechanism guaranteeing absolute silence. The privilege against self-incrimination merely conditions the duty to testify. If a specific question crosses the legal line, the witness must actively claim the privilege to stop the inquiry. The legal system maps out clear, procedural avenues for citizens to challenge government overreach. Answering a question fraudulently subverts the entire judicial process. The grand jury's authority is rooted deep in common law, precisely because society relies on its ability to unearth facts. The precise text of the Fifth Amendment speaks exclusively to compulsion. It prevents the state from coercing an individual into facilitating their own prosecution. The Constitution fiercely limits the government from extracting evidence through force, trickery, or the psychological isolation of a police cell. But that limitation ends the moment a witness attempts to defraud a formal judicial proceeding. The state retains an undeniable right to punish those who swear an oath to the truth and knowingly deliver a falsehood. The holding of United States v. Mandujano establishes a stark perimeter around our legal rights. The Fifth Amendment is an impenetrable shield against forced self-incrimination, but it will never serve as a safe harbor for a lie.